I used to be a lot younger. I don't know how that happened, but there I was. I was about 17. And I was going to sea at that time. At that time, the World War II was on, and I was born in San Francisco Bay, and San Francisco Bay had 300 ships, any of which I could have been put on. But I was put on the Walter Colton with a Liberty ship. Well, since that day, I've been hearing rumors about the South Pacific, and especially Tahiti, and of course, how this was every sailor's dream. And that grew up in my mind that maybe it was every sailor's dream, and became mine. But of course, merchant ships at that time didn't go in there, at least American merchant ships. So it wasn't until 1949 that a friend of mine, Ralph Schrader, a shipmate of mine actually, Ralph Schrader, whom we called Moose, bought a boat. He bought a Block Island ketch, and he somehow brought it around to the West Coast. And he wrote to me, I was in Central America at the time, he wrote to me and said, "Save your money, we're going to Tahiti." Well, I was overjoyed. I saved what few dollars I could scrape together. And sooner or later we got together in San Francisco Bay, actually in San Rafael Slough. And we started putting together not only supplies for a long journey, charts, drinking. We rebuilt some tanks for drinking water, and we coerced, 3 fellows, a friend of mine and 2 of Ralph's, into crewing with us. None of them had any previous sea experience, especially the Brent brothers and my friend Bob Burton. Well, we decided to go anyway because although they couldn't sailorize or do anything about a boat, they could play bridge. And Ralph was a bridge fiend. And so he had 3 other bridge players to play with. I didn't play. I was the erstwhile navigator. Having recently sat for my license, I was, without doubt, a navigator certified, but I never had any practical experience, so this was it. Like yachts of today, who have everything in the way of electronics and dig-round sails, you name it, unlike yachts of today, we had nothing. We had 10-year-old cotton sails, and they tore all the time, so I made sure I brought my needle and palm along. We had no radio direction finder. Oh, well, we did have one that sort of worked. We had no radio. We had no depth sounder. We had no real emergency gear. I don't think we had a lifeboat or even a dinghy. But what we had was determination to find out what this Tahiti was all about. Well, we set sail, I forget what the date was, sometime in 1949, June sometime. And we went into the Golden Gate to no great acclaim and sailed down the coast to San Pedro, where we managed to bugger up our engine. We ran out of oil, which we forgot to bring. It was an old automobile Durant conversion. And we ran out of oil, and so geniuses that we were, we put in salad oil. which burnt up immediately, as you can imagine. So we put it into the pier and spent, I think, 3 or 4 days fixing it up, cleaning it up. We met Sterling Hayden, who was not very nice. And we also met one of the around-the-worlder guys whose name I'll think of in a minute. But anyway, eventually we left San Pedro. The weather was not great. We had these big sloppy seas following us, rolling down the coast of California and out to the broad Pacific. Every morning there were, it seemed to me, one singular wave that just before I got off watch would soak me so I could go to bed all wet. As I said, my friend Bob Burton was a great pal, but I learned to hate him. I learned to hate him because, well, only for a short while, because he was the guy that woke me up for watch. And I see his hairy face glaring at me. Oh God, not time to go on watch again, is it? Yes, Herman. So anyway, we went rolling down the coast. The weather moderated and became deep blue, oh so blue, with bioluminescence at night in the water, and the sunny days, and the flying fish, which we ate for breakfast when they landed on deck. So for 32 days we went barreling down, playing bridge, and me doing the navigating. There was one alarming day when the chronometer stopped. For those of you who are familiar with navigation, you can't get your longitude unless your chronometer is working and is rated. But for some reason we were able to pick up on our slapdash together radio, airplane radio device, whatever it was, WWG in Washington, and we got a time tick and we could set the clock again. We made sure that somebody was aware of winding it each day. And other than that, we fished all the way to the Marquesas where we were heading. I only caught one bonito. Seems sort of rare, but that's in keeping with my fishing luck. It was a good treat. Every day we had choice cuisine, beans and rice, alternated with rice and beans, then again beans and rice, with canned roast beef and stuff like that. Well, after 31 days, a couple of the chaps got worried about my navigation and said, "How do you know we're here?" And I would point on the chart and say, "That's where we are, that's what the mathematics tells us, that's what my sights say. I take noon sights and I take afternoon sights, and I'm pretty sure of my navigation." And as it turned out, it was spot on. We had thought we would see the island of Nukuhiva, which is very high, from 60 miles off, but we were sadly disappointed when by sundown we didn't see it. But around 8 o'clock at night, we saw a fire on the shore, and so we knew that we'd hit something. And as it turned out, it was Nukuhiva. We made a good landfall. We missed Nukuhiva entrance, Taiohae Bay entrance, by, oh, I don't know, half an hour. But it took 8 hours to beat back into the wind to get into the harbor and the anchorage, sewing sails all the while. I have a picture of that. Well, the Marquesas are high tropical islands, volcanic islands, about 600 miles north of Tahiti. And they're so beautiful, and you can't believe these sharp valleys and mountains. The bay itself, Tahiti, was absolutely gorgeous. If you look at pictures of that bay today, it's crowded with yachts and bars and stuff. But then, we were the only boat there, 35-foot catch, the only boat. So we didn't know what to do. We knew we had to go here for the French administrator to enter the islands. So we dropped the hook and just stood around with our fingers in our pockets and gawked. And a boat came out from the shore with an oldish man in a palm hat and a young boy. And we said, "Hi." He said, "Hi." We said, "You got any beer here?" And he says, "No, but this kid's father has." Well, it turns out that was Bob McKinnon. I may have that name wrong. But the boy was his son, so it was all right. We went ashore and we drank beer for hours, and oh, it was glorious. It was the first beer we'd had in 32 days, and it was from Australia and cool. Well, anyway, we slept well that night. The next day, we decided to hike over to Tahiti, which is the valley where Herman Melville jumped ship and lived with the natives, reputed to be cannibals. Well, we took a hike, 14 kilometers over the hills, down into the valley, down to this beautiful beach of palm trees, and we were met by the then schoolmaster and his entire school of little kids. There must have been about 30 children, and they insisted on us taking their picture in front of their school building, which we did. I remember a great linguists that we were, we said, "Bob, you speak French?" Bob said, "Yeah." And he went, "Parlez-vous français?" And the man answered in excellent French. Then Bob said, "Well, we don't." But by gestures and a word here and there, we got along very fine. That was a good visit to the reputed Valley of the Taipis. You can read it in Herman Melville's book, Taipei. So after a couple of days, we sailed for the Tuamotus on the way to Tahiti. The Tuamotus are a whole series of low islands, lagoons inside these rings of islets. And they're very hard to see when you're out to sea. But when we got to where I thought we were heading for Takaroa, I decided that, well, we're too far to the east, but we should see another little island if I went up the mast. Because about all you can see in these islands are the tops of the coconut trees. I went up the mast, and lo and behold, it was like giving birth. I worked this out. There were the tops of the coconut trees. Of course, I didn't have a clue whether it was the right island, but it turned out to be. So we found our way down to the entrance of the lagoon, which was on the south side, and we pulled up to a kind of a stony dock, and there was a whole village waiting for us, smiles on their faces. And they had gotten together a huge pile of coconuts and chickens with their legs tied. And they said, "This is for you." Ralph said, "Well, how much?" They didn't know the meaning of money. They didn't want anything for it. So we spent, I think, a night or two there. Then we were going to head to where most of the islanders were, the next island over. But before we left, I talked to one of the natives who knew a little English. He says, "Oh, life is very hard on this island. I have to work 2 days a week." So I thought someday I should go back there. Well, anyway, the next island over, we had trouble finding the entrance. But fortunately, a schooner came out and put a pilot on board our boat, a young man who knew the lagoon. And he went up in the cross trees and he guided us in. And we anchored just off the village at the south side of this tremendous big lagoon. And we could see fires and people walking around in nothing but parios, colored cloths. But we didn't want to go to shore that night. We were a little hesitant. So we just dropped the hook and went to sleep. The next morning we were awakened by a rim of little faces at the hatch looking down on us, saying, "Get up!" The kids were curious and they swam out to make sure we got ashore. And we were feted and treated like royalty. This is 1949. No other boats in sight the whole trip. And we had lunch at the house of Martin. I remember his name, Martin. And he gave us his last bottle of vermouth. And he gave us lots of beer. And we were so full of food. All kinds of coconut dishes, fish dishes. This is where we were first introduced to poisson cru, which is, it's like ceviche. It's chopped up fish, fresh fish, soaked overnight in lime juice, and then you add coconut milk, or coconut cream, I should say, and it tastes like heaven. All this time I was thinking, of all the places I heard about and imagined, when I got to them, they were not quite what I expected, but this was more, much more. That evening we were entertained at the church. Long tables set for dinner. And there was a band playing. When I say band, I mean a bunch of young men playing ukuleles and drums and guitars. Oh, so pleasant. And the chief gave a long talk about how glad he was to have us there. And weren't we the intrepid ones making all that distance in a little boat like that? And it was very congenial. And of course, Ralph had to answer He couldn't speak Polynesian. So he said something about this, that, and the other thing. And then everybody applauded. Then the band really struck up. And there was dancing like you've never seen before. All the wahinis and the young man put out this tremendous dance. Toward the end of it, one of the wahinis was sort of segregated, and she beckoned to us. And the guys kept nudging me, you go. We were sitting at a separate table. I thought, me? I can't dance. I'm as shy as a shell. But anyway, they pushed me out there, and because I couldn't do the dance she was doing, I did the only thing I could do was the Russian hopak, this bit. And they just screamed with laughter. They thought that was the funniest thing they ever saw. And I danced with her a bit like that, and then I, red-faced and laughing, I made my way back to our table. And then there was a bit of a disappointed look over the crowd, because the girl had run off into the night, and it follows that I was supposed to chase her. But not knowing the customs, not knowing what their church rules meant, well, anyway, I was supposed to, but I didn't. These islands, these Tuamotus, this cloud of islands, they're half Mormon, half of them are Mormon, and half of them are Episcopalian or Catholic, I forget. So I didn't know what I'd be getting into if I chased her into the bushes. Not only that, I was shy and full of beer. But the next morning, we walked around the village. Somebody lent me a bike. I have a picture of this too. I was riding my bike, and all the little kids were running after me doing the hopak and laughing. Well, we left Manihi, was the name of the island, after a couple of days, I guess, we spent there, and headed for the big island, Tahiti. Third successful landfall. Man, when I saw the mountains, Mount Orohena, with the clouds around it, and the beautiful shore, I almost couldn't take it. After all those dreams, after all those years, I was finally there. Well, we rounded Tahiti and got to the harbor of Papeete, which is the town, big town. And who comes steaming out to meet us but the pilot boat which brings in the great steamers that come in. With the little puffy pilot, they're all dressed in uniforms. And the pilot boat was maybe 1.5 times the size of our boat. They put the pilot aboard, and he says, Captain, he's talking to Schrader about this time. Are you ready to anchor? Send the chief mate forward to get the anchor ready and tell the engineers that we are going to go into the harbor. So, that's what we acted like. We were, a huge, big ship. And when we got close to the quay, where all the boats were tied up, there were a lot of yachts there. We dropped the anchor. I had it in my hand, and when the pilot said, drop the anchor, I let it go. It's not like a big 10,000-ton vessel. And we tied her up with a stern to the quay, with a board that you could walk across onto the quay, and the anchor out forward, and there we stayed for about, I guess it was 3 weeks. We were excited to be there, and we wanted to jump ashore and get what? You guessed it, a beer. But we couldn't get off the boat until the doctor, the customs, and all the other officials came aboard. They almost sank the boat with their big, heavy uniforms. They came below, and Schrader had to declare everything we had on the boat, including a case of soap that we had, of which more later. Had to declare the amount of money we had. Ew, that was bad. We didn't have much money. I personally had $12. I lent Bob Burton 6 of it. And yet, leaping ahead, we had the time of our lives on that $12. But you're supposed to have so much money coming in a month in order to be able to stay in Tahiti. However, they allowed us, I think it was 2 weeks to stay, and then we had to go. So all these officials stomped off the boat, and we were cleared, and we could go ashore, which we did. Bob and I went our separate ways, looking for the nearest bar, which happened to be, I forget the name of it. I'll think of it in a minute. Most famous bar in Tahiti. And there we sat, looked at the pretty ladies, and drank beer, and wandered around town, acting the complete tourist. And that was it for about 2 weeks, interspersed with this wonderful fish market in the mornings. Starts about 6 o'clock. Oh God, you can see everything that comes out of the sea in that fish market. And the people carry it off in palm leaf baskets. Nobody was cooking on board, so we didn't buy any. We were tired of rice and beans. Then Bob and I one day took a tour around the island. There are 2 ways of getting around the island. One is to take the bus, and the other is to walk. Well, we did a little of each. The buses are wonderful. When somebody wants to stop the bus, they put a palm leaf in front of the road, and the bus stops. And the bus driver might have breakfast with whoever's getting on the boat before he comes back, or he might shave or something like that. There's no hurry in Tahiti, no hurry. And so slowly the bus, which is loaded with pigs, watermelons, fish, everything on the roof, crates of chickens and people, and very cheap. And when you want to get off, you just get off and catch the next bus. We got off for a while and we walked among some houses on the Taravao Peninsula. And almost at every house, someone came out and said, Yorana, Yorana, Hedemai, Tama'a, which means greetings, come here and eat. And we did stop at one house. It was an old lady, must have been in her 80s. I can't imagine being that old. And she said, sit on this bed, which we did. She said, that's the bed that used to be owned by Zane Grey. Now, you may not know who Zane Grey is, but he was the greatest writer of Western stories of that era. Zane Grey had a fishing boat down there, and he fished for swordfish and things like that. Well, she had his bed when he left. And then we met people like, oh, I forget, old Wallace. He had nothing, and he was absolutely happy. You got the food you wanted from the trees, you got, or the ground, or from neighbors, or from chickens. He had one coconut bowl. That was his only pottery. He washed it after he used it, and that's the only thing he used. He ate with his fingers. He was totally happy. He had no possessions, and I think that's what made him happy, Walter. Well, we continued around the island, mostly then by bus, and we came back for another night of beer drinking, dancing, going from bar to bar. There was the Elk called Blue, which is a more or less famous one, and the one I forgot. Anyway, I fell in with a young lady whose name was Leela. Her father owned the concession for the stevedores, the stevedore concession. He used to be prize boxer, prize fighter, champion of the South Seas. And she and I went drinking, dancing, and we had a great time. One day she dropped by with a couple of trucks filled with young children and older ladies and pretty girls in general, and invited Bob and me to go out to a picnic spot. Acres and acres in this great pool, acres and acres of watercress you swim amongst, and a pretty house where they prepared a lunch that would knock your socks off. That was Jack Hood and I, not Bob Burton. Jack was a weightlifter, and he was Mr. Muscle. God, he was a beautiful man. And here I am, I look like a rail or a needle with its eye. I was skinny, in other words. And I wish I hadn't lost that picture. Well, we had a wonderful lunch there, and we went back, and another night of dancing, swimming, drinking, and whatever you do in Tahiti. And during that time also, there was the governor's ball. The governor's ball. For some reason, I ended up alone after all the dances. Dance groups came from all over the island and all over the other islands, and they put on this performance that was out of this world. It's like, it was almost like that big celebration they have in July, I forget the name of, Bastille Day. Almost like that, but not quite. And the governor handed out champagne, and we drank, and we watched, and we had a good time. But I remember sitting there, crying into my champagne, thinking, Jesus, what is wrong with my life that here I am in the happiest place in the world, and I'm as sad as I can possibly be. I guess I had a bad champagne reaction or whatever, but I thought my life consisted of drinking and sailing and fooling around, and I had nothing really to back me up in a way of life. Anyway, thoughts like that. But I remember that night because I should have been happy. I was extremely unhappy. Well, time came when we had to leave. So all of our friends, everybody, half the town, was at the dock to bid us farewell. For once, the engine decided to work when we didn't want it to. So put, 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 we went out of the harbor. People had filled us with leis. No. We had leis up to our eyebrows. And the idea was to, when you go offshore, if you throw the lei over the side and it floats back to the island, you shall return. Well, we threw our leis over, and I threw my lei over. But again, there was a lot of beer and jollies at the dock before we left. And I not only threw my lei over, I threw myself over. How that happened was, when we were going out, there had been some warm weather clothes stuck around the engine. And they started smoking from the exhaust pipe. So I leaned over and got a bucket of water. I was going to throw it on to the smoldering engine. Ralph said, "Don't do that, you'll crack the block," or something like that. "Well," I said, "if that's the way you want it." I put the bucket down and I leaned back on the life rails, forgetting completely that I didn't put the life rails up. So there I was, floundering in the water with my lei, and they had to stop the boat and pick me up. As they were pulling me back aboard, I was a little embarrassed, but not too embarrassed. They were kind of angry at me, thinking that I was trying to leave them and swim back. Well, I don't know if I could have swum back 5 miles, but thus we were on our way to Bora Bora. Now, we had no permission to go to Bora Bora from the Corsican governor. For some reason, those days, they had all Corsicans as governor of this French island. On the way over, we had quite a bit of wind in back of us, and to prevent a jibe, I thoughtlessly tied the boom to one of the stays to keep holding it over, on a jibe. But the wind got in back of it somehow and broke the boom. So there we were with only a jib to sail around Bora Bora. But we decided, well, maybe this is a happy event. We have to now go into Bora Bora to fix our boom. Trouble was, we had no charts for Bora Bora. So as it was getting late and the moon was coming up, we could see the surf around Bora Bora hissing deadly white. We thought, we're going to find a hole in that and go into Bora Bora Lagoon. There used to be lights. The Navy during the war had been on Bora Bora, and they fixed it up with lights and all that, but the French took them out. So we were without lights, without navigation markers of any kind. But just by the grace of something, we saw a hole in the reef. We went zipping through, and the next morning we were anchored off of a dock, happily sleeping a dreadful night off. It turned out that The hut at the end of the dock was celebrating their birthday. They were celebrating it for 5 days when we joined them. And we would have wine with them in the morning and in the afternoon until the French administrator of the island came down and waved his arms and legs and said something in French to the effect that we'd better get to work. So we bought a 4x4 and shaved it down to the size of a boom, and we're about ready to go. We also at that time met Francis, who used to be Nancy Hall's teacher. Now you've heard of Norruff and Hall, Mutiny on the Bounty. Hall and Norruff lived on the islands. Not that, they lived on Tahiti. And he introduced us to his wife, and he gave us lunch in this huge building, grass hut, that used to be the officers' club when the Navy was there. And he was as kind could be, and he wrote a letter to Nancy for us to take up to her in Hawaii. She lived in Kaneohe or some such place. And we took the letter, and again, we left sad. About this time, I came to the realization that I didn't want to live anywhere else. And I think because of that, the experiences I had in these islands ruined any aspirations I had for doing anything else with my life than going back. Unrealistic. So we sailed north, past a small motu, or island on the way, that we had to claw off of. The wind, we were on a lee shore, the wind was pushing us onto it. During the night, all we could see were the breakers, and I once again became a foxhole convert, and I guess I prayed us off those breakers. We missed the motu and went north to an island called Carolyn. We were on our way to Hawaii, but we passed Carolyn on the way. Nobody lived on the island. We dropped the anchor on the reef, and we walked ashore. And it was strange. The birds were so friendly. They'd sit in the trees and go out and pet them if you wanted to. We got a few coconuts. I must say something about coconuts. Coconuts are the great saviors of the Polynesians. They can do anything with a coconut tree. House, boats, food of all kinds. When they have, 25 different names for different stages of coconuts. Ones we were interested with the green coconuts. You chopped off the top and you drank the liquor, and it was like carbonated, cool water. It was delicious. So we grabbed a few of those and hung around there for a while, and then off to the big island of Hawaii. We stayed a night in Hilo. We had the afternoon aboard a Japanese fishing boat, sharing their sashimi with them. Oh God, piles of sashimi, bottles of beer. And then heavy weather to Honolulu. Needless to say, my excellent navigation got us everywhere, right on target. But But we were still talking to each other after all these months at sea together. And so that's sort of remarkable. We almost didn't make it into Alawai Canal in Honolulu because the sails ripped, but we were pulled off by a small boat and brought to an anchorage. The next day we were asked by I think the Honolulu Star Bulletin to talk about our trip. So that was our only radio venture. That's how we got to Hawaii. That's all you're going to get for right now.